This is Inspiring Design, where unique innovators come together to share their knowledge, share their insight, and keep us up to date with the latest industry trends. And here's your host, Rushan Senanayake.
What's up, listeners? Welcome to Inspiring Design. This is where the best of the best brands, experts, change makers, and thought leaders come together to share their valuable insights, experience, and knowledge. Our goal here is to be the missing link between education, design, and the industry. So today here, I've actually got a very special guest and a colleague of mine to speak about online design education. So let me welcome Madeline Taylor from QUT. Now, I will give a little bit of a background on Madeline before we bring her on. Madeline is a fashion and performance designer, researcher, and educator. She's a lecturer at fashion at QUT and a PhD candidate at the Victorian College of Arts in the University of Melbourne. Her research focuses on the interpersonal dynamics of collaboration, effectively addressing the questions, how can we work together better? With almost 2 decades of professional experience, she has worked on over 90 production theatres, dance, opera, circus, contemporary performance, and film around Australia and the UK. More recently, I have worked with Madeline in the design-intensive delivery at QUT for the first years, involving over 600 students, all online. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. Madeline, welcome to Inspiring Design. Can we start off with a little bit of background on yourself, your story? What's your history?
Yeah, sure. So I have been working mostly in performance design and in fashion since about 2003. And I was very fortunate to start kind of off in the industry as an apprentice in the costume workshop at Queensland Theatre Company, and then kind of transitioned slowly into more design work. And over the last kind of decade, have been increasingly fascinated by the interpersonal dynamics of how we work together. And this is something that's kind of really informed my research in recent years. So I started a PhD about 3 or 4 years ago, and that's looking at how designers and technicians work together to kind of create a shared aesthetic understanding of the work that they're creating together. Because I think there's a kind of bit of a disconnect, I think, between what we say we do and what we do. And I'm very interested in particular in how technical staff kind of take the information that designers give them and use that to kind of make their own aesthetic judgments and progress the design further through prototyping and kind of those technical kind of challenges. And I think the more that you can kind of short circuit the communication and trust building process in that relationship, the kind of quicker you're going to get to an outcome that everybody's going to be happy with. It's going to have the kind of the design resolution that the designer is looking for. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of my area of interest. I've been teaching at QUT as a sessional staff member for 7 or 8 years, and also kind of doing some teaching at University of Melbourne since I started doing my PhD there in the design schools. And that's also made me very interested in how we can teach students collaboration, because I think there's a little bit of a sense that we can kind of, because we as practitioners get so used to doing it, we kind of forget that it's a learned skill. And so how do you teach that one that kind of often feels like it's a tacit skill or an innate ability? I don't think that's necessarily true. I think we can teach that stuff. But it's quite often we kind of send students into groups and go forth, collaborate. And we don't necessarily give them the kind of underpinning structures that might help them navigate that situation. And, if they do have challenges in their team, quite often you go, oh, that's a learning experience. That's how you learn to design, is kind of overcoming those challenges together. But it can be a pretty fraught way of learning. So I think kind of providing some more kind of underpinning information and ideas about how students can navigate those situations is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously that kind of thing, it's a vital skill, I think, towards their, what do you call, learning. And it's, so this is, I think, something I've seen evident within, I think, your leadership, the design intensive at QUT. So if we get straight into that, can you give the listeners a little bit of background on what the design intensive was?
Yeah, sure. So the design intensive at QUT has been kind of running in lots of different iterations for more than a decade. Last year, we were kind of running it as a camp where students went away and spent 2.5 days kind of working in the bush together to create a kind of a design project. This year, we were planning to run it in the Botanic Gardens, where students had to kind of create a biophilic inspired design, inspired by the landscape that they were in these Botanic Gardens, and kind of respond to a brief to create that. Then, of course, coronavirus came along, and we had to radically rethink kind of the learning, the teaching, and the assessment for this unit. Because rather than kind of spending 2.5 days outside together, kind of physically building prototypes and kind of responding to the natural environment they were going to be in, instead this intensive was going to be delivered online with everybody kind of working remotely and having to come together on kind of online platforms. But we still wanted to have the focus on learning how to collaborate, learning how to work with interdisciplinary groups, working how to create, kind of solve kind of big interdisciplinary problems. So kind of working with those challenges and still kind of provide a really great learning experience for the students. And we had to move pretty rapidly. We kind of had confirmation that we needed to move online about a fortnight or kind of 10 days before we had to deliver the program. So that was a big challenge in itself, just trying to kind of redevelop what our plan was really quite significantly. But yeah, I think we managed a really great program, and I'm really proud of what our students managed to achieve and what we managed to achieve in that time. Mm-hmm. And we decided to shift the brief to really respond to the situation we were finding ourselves in. So rather than kind of getting students to come up with a kind of physical item that allowed for kind of this non-human interaction, think about how we can form a place attachment remotely. So really kind of make use of the fact that everybody was going to be working remotely. Everybody is now a lot of people are now kind of stuck in their apartments or houses, and aren't having much natural environment connection. So how can we kind of take this situation we're in and turn it into a learning experience, and hopefully address some of the kind of anxiety and kind of issues the students were experiencing themselves as they kind of made this transition.
Yeah, and the quality of output in terms of the ideas that came out of it, there were some really cool ones that actually surprised me.
Oh my gosh, it was really exciting. So we asked the students to come up with something that had a digital manifestation, so something that had like a kind of an online presence or some kind of something that could be accessed remotely, and also then has some kind of physical presence. So making something manifest in the gardens, so people who were coming to the gardens could actually kind of access this design experience or design intervention the students were coming up with. And yeah, some of the kind of ideas that the students were coming up with were so rich. It was really, really thrilling to see what they were creating. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And so what were the numbers in terms of the students and then the staff ratio? How was that managed?
Yeah, so we had about 630 students enrolled. So we had about 330, I think we did two blocks, so 2.5 days, and then a second 2.5 days over the kind of Monday to Friday. So we had 330 students for the first one, and I think just over 300 for the second kind of block. And we were really conscious about trying to kind of keep the studio staff ratio that we had planned. So we kind of have 18 students in studio per staff member. And so we kept that ratio for the online thing, mostly because we knew that the students would need that kind of support, particularly because this was a first semester subject. So really emerging designers. and this intensive is happening 6 weeks into their course, so they're really they're very junior,
they're very fresh
in their process learning process. So we kept that ratio. We were very lucky that we had some really experienced staff members like yourself. How long you've been doing the intensive kind of for 7 or 8 years?
I think my first one was 2013, so it's 7 years, seventh year, I guess.
Yeah, so that's fantastic. So we had a mix of people who had done the intensive before, and some people who are newer. We tried to keep them we did teaching pairs, which would help kind of in terms of kind of relieving the pressure on the staff, and also kind of providing a mix of disciplines and a mix of kind of perspectives when students went for feedback. So that helped with that kind of making sure there was a really interdisciplinary skill mix.
Yeah. And I think the question, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I think the thing that I'm wondering, and a lot of the questions that I get from educators is within this whole online thing, how do you keep accountability and quality within the teaching and learning experience? Like, did you have any tactics and tips and tricks for the listeners?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think having teaching pairs really helped, because we did then make sure that kind of if there was a skills gap or an issue that was addressed. We had daily check-ins as well with all the tutoring staff, so that helped in terms of kind of making sure everybody was on the same page in terms of messaging, in terms of how people were resolving problems, in terms of how many times students were kind of touching in with tutors. We also, and that kind of allowed for practice sharing. So quite often the tutors were coming up with some really brilliant ideas about how to handle situations, and which will be able to pass that information along. We also were very conscious about what the student journey was going to be throughout this whole intensive. And so we kind of fairly closely mapped when they'd be checking in, how they'd be checking in, kind of the interactions that would be happening, and provided a lot of materials and guidance in terms of how that should be occurring, both for information for the tutors and in terms of PowerPoints and kind of materials to give them, provide ways to answer questions, and also for the student provided a kind of really clear schedule and kind of guidance about the tasks that they should be achieving kind of progressively.
Yeah. And what were the platforms, like the software application you guys used?
So we used Zoom for a lot of our face-to-face or kind of, digital face-to-face learning. And that worked really successfully. Obviously, we had a kind of Zoom worked really hard over the last kind of few weeks to kind of provide a really stable and reliable platform, and that worked for us. And we also had some kind of offered the students a few different platforms in terms of how they were going to work together, and kind of asked them to kind of do the research about which platform they were going to use as their primary platform, and incorporate that into the task. So we often made a few suggestions, which were WordPress, using the Google Documents kind of slide suite, and also Miro, which I cannot recommend highly enough. Miro was definitely the shining star in terms of the platform that we used, because it firstly was fantastic in kind of providing a really kind of dynamic and kind of organic way for students to think about their process, and also kind of map their process. And the other thing in terms of academic integrity that's really exciting about Miro is that it kind of, every time a student touches the board, it captures that data. So you can go through, if you want to later, and if you have any issues around in terms of group member contributions or things like that, you can access that information and find out who's been doing what on the board. So in terms of
absolutely.
And also that kind of making sure that the students are doing things regularly, like in terms of academic integrity, Miro is really strong. So that's a kind of a hot tip.
Yeah, I think that's a definite giveaway. I didn't know that about the fact that it captures that. It's pretty cool, because there's another platform similar to Miro called Mural. And I don't know if that one actually uses that. We've used Mural for some work practices, and that's been helpful. But we've actually transitioned into Miro personally after the design intensive, just for practical purposes. So that's pretty cool, actually. Now, how what's the main difference, do you think, in terms of the learning and teaching experience compared to obviously in person and online? What are the biggest challenges?
Well, I think one of the things that we were really mindful about was providing and the quality of experience. So I think one of the things that kind of everybody's wrestling with right now is how you can provide a quality of experience if people aren't necessarily having internet access issues or using computers that are kind of, like they don't have access to computers and things like that, where they previously might be working on campus. So we were really kind of mindful in terms of when we were discussing the group formation and kind of group practices with our students, for them to think about, if someone has caring responsibilities, if someone doesn't have access to regular internet, if they're sharing their computer with their little brother who's also having to do, assessment or whatever, how do you negotiate that and making that part of the team discussions? Yeah. And so kind of providing kind of students with going, okay, if this person isn't going to be able to access things, what can they be doing online? What can they be doing, tangibly that then they can upload? So getting them to really think through that process together as a group, I think was really important. Mm-hmm. The other kind of challenge that I think we were mindful about was the consistency, as you talked about, kind of making sure that students had a consistent experience across the cohort. And which we kind of addressed through lots of kind of through the structuring. But I think one of the things that we were really excited by in terms of shifting from kind of a really tangible physical thing to a more to this digital online collaboration space was how the students responded by really digging into the design process. They really kind of seemed to provided a space for them to do a lot more reflection on their process as they progressed, which was so exciting to see in terms of kind of what we were trying to teach them. But also meant that we could kind of encourage them to stay in various stages more. So we're like, we could encourage them to stay in the ideation phase, I think, for longer. Whereas when we were doing the physical thing, because they had materials, they wanted to move very quickly to the prototyping stage, because that was, in response to the kind of media they had. Whereas with this one, because they were working online, there was a lot more research that they felt like they could do before they moved into, as part of their ideationing. So yeah, that was kind of interesting to see how the different spaces facilitated different types of learning.
Yeah. And what do you think are the positives that will come out of this? Obviously, this whole environment, even with, I think, industry practice, the way we work, the way we design, it's going to change. It's going to evolve now because of this forced, I think, element. So what do you think were the positives that came out of this?
There was so many, I think. One of the things that we did for this, we kind of pushed really hard, or worked really hard to kind of keep for the intensive, was still including a version of Welcome to Country. So we had Derek Sandy, who's a Yagro man, who's a traditional custodian of the region that the Botanic Gardens was based in. Shift to father doing a Welcome to Country, doing a yarn about country, which included a didgeridoo performance. And I was kind of, by making that forefront and center as kind of part of the kickoff for each intensive, it really kind of made that kind of central to, I think, the student experience. It kind of really provided a great energy as we kicked off as well. But I was really excited to see how students were then using that information in their design practice and incorporating that kind of perspective. I think was really exciting, and kind of working with Derek to kind of take this very traditional knowledge and shift it into a kind of really contemporary kind of technological space was really exciting. I think that kind of was a great learning for me to see how that could work. The other thing that I think was really exciting and kind of I can kind of see being really important is when I was doing some research with design intensive students last year, they were talking about how they really wanted to have ways to capture their process so they could take them to kind of, job interviews, put them in portfolios, things like that. And I think the things like the Miro boards allowed that capturing of their kind of process that they can kind of then use to kind of reflect on, and also kind of, in terms of jobs applications and things like that. So I think there's really rich space in the digital world to make use of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty unique one, because usually the students who go to second, third, fourth year, they start to think about their portfolio. It's interesting that that they were thinking about it from a first year. I definitely know that I wasn't. I think that clued on when we did things.
Yeah, so I think that's a really kind of, getting them to think early about what they do and how they do it, and how they can communicate that is exciting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And on the contrary, did you have any challenges? Did you have any student issues to deal with?
We did have an issue of a Zoom bomber that was pretty hard. It ended up there not being a student at all. It ended up being someone who, because Kate, must have, we think from kind of what IT investigated, got the information about the intensive from another student, and then kind of came in and disrupted some things, which we managed to shut down pretty quickly and kind of resolve. But it was a big learning in terms of just kind of being mindful that people will do that, and how to navigate that. So we kind of implemented some more security protocols, and that kind of resolved it for the duration. But just being kind of mindful that this online space is an online space that kind of a lot of people can access was a big learning for me.
It was, yeah. I think password protecting it obviously is the easiest method. Did you think that essentially mitigates it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one of the things that we kind of were looking at was also, we were kind of also using Zoom breakout rooms extensively, and they also kind of provide a level of protection, or kind of providing, waiting room functions and class lists as a combination. So there's a few different ways to mitigate that. I guess the issue was the scale that we were working on. If you're working on a scale of 20 class of 20, it's a lot more containable than you're working on a class of 600. So I think you kind of just need to be mindful at the scale that you're working on and what works for each scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the challenge here. This is one of the reasons I wanted to talk with you, because of the sheer scale of, managing 600 people, 600 students, not just people, and then actually guiding them through a design process. Now, what was the feedback from the students? Did they find the experience a positive one?
Yeah, we've had some really positive feedback from students saying thanks. I think they were firstly really grateful that we pursued going ahead with the learning, because especially at a time, I mean, it's only been 2 weeks now really since we've done it, but at that time in particular, everything felt very uncertain. I think now people are kind of COVID in Australia in particular is kind of seeming less, it's kind of on the downward curve, we hope. So I think it's feeling less kind of stressful, but I think students really appreciated that we kind of pursued it, that we created a really great positive learning environment for them. But also I think the students were also aware that the skills that they learnt about online collaboration, about how to work together in groups remotely, are going to serve them really well. And we're seeing that kind of coming up in the feedback that they're giving and the kind of reflections that we're asking them to submit now. And there's a few comments as well, which I thought was really interesting, about students who felt that the online space actually served them better in terms of feeling confident to put ideas forward, and also to kind of, because it's slightly anonymous, or they're working on kind of, you're not just speaking, but you're also kind of writing on, drawing things, they could put forward ideas in multiple forms so that they kind of, the way that they communicated could suit them. So I thought that was really interesting as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's actually interesting. The students that I was managing, we actually asked them what they thought throughout the process, in the mornings, the second day, third day, and so on. And the consistent theme that we kept getting was, this is great. We don't have to leave our bedrooms, so we can just literally wake up at 8:50 and then be in class at 9 o'clock. Right? I'm like, really? You would rather do this than actually be in a camp? They're like, yes, absolutely. It's just easier. We can just go to the kitchen and get all the food. And I'm like, oh wow, different generation.
But the thing that I think that was interesting is that the thing that I was concerned about potentially was this experience is quite formative for the students in terms of building connections across the disciplines and building friendships as they go into their university studies. And I really wanted to make sure that kind of continued, because university can be quite an isolating experience if you don't kind of have build those connections early.
Yeah.
But they all seem to build really strong connections with the people in their groups because I guess of that intensive mode, even though they were working online versus in person, those connections were being built, and that was really lovely to see.
Yeah, no, that's good. And that's the beautiful part about this whole intensive, because I'm still friends with some of my group members from the design camp back in 2008. So
wow.
it's great. Like Tanya Desplat, she was from an industrial background. Like we still stay in touch, and we literally met on camp. So it's brilliant.
Oh, that's so good. I didn't know that.
Now, looking at doing some forecasting and looking into the future, do you think that this will change the way we teach design?
I mean, I think it's definitely going to change how Shiona and I, or whoever else does the design intensive in the future, does it. I think it's opened our eyes to the possibilities of what the design intensive can be, particularly because we're working across such a large cohort of various different, disciplines. Some of the disciplines that aren't as, so that's not the non-spatial, the experiential disciplines, such as interaction design or visual design or industrial design, previously might have felt a bit disconnected from the tasks of the kind of the theme of the unit, which is place, and the fact that we're so kind of place-based when we go to sites. So I think this will gives us a kind of some potential for how we can incorporate more disciplines, or kind of incorporate more different perspectives into the design intensive. I also do think there's something about one of the things we had done early in the workshops that kind of led up to the intensive was kind of doing lots of research and sending the students out into the gardens, and then kind of moving to an online space. So I think there's something about the combination of having that physical and the digital and kind of working in combination that we will definitely be wanting to pursue, because I think that was a really strong thing. I don't think that the ideas or the student experience would be as strong as we hadn't had those initial workshops in place.
Yeah. And I know one of the students actually did send one of their members out to the garden to do a site visit, and they took back photos, and half of the presentation where they did collages and things like that came from the photos that they took. So I'm glad, but I think that group was a little bit different. It's simply because one of the group members just used to live across the river in South Bank. So a short stroll, and I think it just came about naturally. But I think you're right in saying that I think the sweet spot is somewhere in between, where we combine that digital realm as well as the physical. We can't, I think, just be 100% with one.
Yeah.
And looking at students going into practice in 2025, 2030, 2035, 2040. They're going to need those skills more than what we do. So I think you're absolutely spot on with that. I think, which actually takes me to my next question. How do you think universities and schools can effectively teach online, knowing where this is going to be headed?
Well, I think
bit of a tough one.
Just solve the problem. I think the thing that made this successful, or one of the things I think we did that was right, was making the challenges that students were experiencing part of their job to solve. So we weren't necessarily trying to make solve their problems. We were making the stuff like, what platform were you using? How are you going to work together as a group? The fact that you have to work remotely, part of the challenge for them. So each group was kind of coming up with different solutions, and they were having to think through those solutions and what worked for their individual teams together. Rather than kind of being kind of more didactic in terms of, this is the situation and this is, your solution is going to follow this tangent. So I think that's kind of a really strong way to go, because it first encourages students to kind of think through their situations a bit more, and also kind of gives them experience and challenge in kind of solving those wicked problems,
Yeah. And I think that's the beauty of it. It's that critical thinking, that creative problem solving that allows them to move forward in rather than us telling them this is the solution, go and move forward with it. They're finding their own path. And I think because of that, they'll have that knowledge, that skill set for the rest of their career, essentially. So that's great. That's great. And do you have any practice tips for the students? I do get some students that listen to these podcasts as well, and they are always wanting to know about design and their techniques and whatever. Do you have any tips and advice for them, looking at how this whole paradigm shift is going to be towards online, the digital realm, the more and more they go into practice? Do you have any tips for them?
I think the thing to kind of be mindful about is that, the process is the same whether you're working in a digital or a virtual. So like kind of being really mindful about process. I think that but having said that, the other aspect of that is I think you need to be really mindful about the platforms you're using, because they do shape how you think. And so I think trying to maybe solve the same design challenge across multiple different problems and platforms, and seeing how your approach has shifted because of the technology you're using, or because of the kind of constraints that you're working in, is a really important thing to do. The other thing that I think is kind of important is to work out what your communication style is, and work out if that works for the people you're communicating with.
Yeah.
So kind of, I think the kind of thinking about different ways you can communicate the same information in multiple different formats is really important, particularly in a digital space where you might not necessarily be talking or working face to face. So it will be able to take in those body language cues. So kind of providing multiple places, ways to communicate ideas is really important.
Yeah. And I think the other side of the coin, especially in the learning and teaching, is the teaching aspect. So do you have any advice for the educators listening in?
I guess my main two top tips are really think through what you're wanting the student journey to be, and maybe like we kind of mapped it out really clearly, like this, go here, think about this, we'll use this platform then, and then we'll shift to that platform, and how will we get from that platform to this platform? So we didn't lose students on that journey, because it's kind of easy to, if you have a tech issue, for them to, to kind of attrit slowly over time. So kind of trying to keep it simple in terms of reducing the amount of platforms you're using. And the other thing is use Miro, because it's amazing.
Yeah, Miro comes back up again. Absolutely.
I don't work for them, but it was really impressive.
No, look, I think I'm an advocate of Miro, and Miro, like platforms like that, help. Even in industry practice, if there's designers in Thailand and designers in the US and Australia, and you're collaborating to deliver a project that's in Russia, that's what the world's coming to. And I think those kinds of platforms definitely do come in handy, because you can still sketch something, work on your desk, and then upload it so that your designers on the other side of the world can collaborate, add to it, build something, and move forward. So I think that's been great. So Maddie, seriously, thank you so much for being here today and giving up your time. There's been a lot of takeaways for educators and the students as well, especially given the current climate. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
That's it for today, everyone. Now, it's time to essentially jump on to rashansenanayaka.com/podcast and check out the show notes from today. Click on the direct links available on that page and get into the extraordinary teaching work that Maddie is doing in education, and feel free to reach out to her as detailed. So lastly, click subscribe and share your love and a review. I'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback about the topic for today as well. So till next time.